The technology of war has evolved at an incredible pace over the last century. For thousands of years, very little changed. The horse was pretty much the pinnacle, whether that was the Battle of Kadesh in the year 1274 BC or the Battle of Waterloo 3,000 years later in 1815 AD. Then, World War I was pretty much the end of that, and the beginning of motorized vehicles, and technology just soared from there to everything we have today, from modern tanks to ICBMs. So, what will the next decade bring us? Will we finally get those lasers that science fiction has been promising us for so long? But first, our sponsor, NordVPN. I know you've heard you should get a VPN over and over again, and there's a good reason for that. It's absolutely true. Whether it's to protect you from hackers, or stop companies, websites, advertisers, or even your own ISP from tracking what websites you visit and what you're buying online. After all, cybercrime in the US alone costs people an estimated $1 billion every day. So when you're looking for a VPN, you want to make sure you get the best. NordVPN has over 5,100 servers in 60 different countries, protection for both your mobile phone as well as your computer, and protects up to 6 different devices simultaneously. That along with all the other features that every VPN provider should have. NordVPN has also won multiple awards, and they're always highly recommended by tech experts. And with my link, you get 73% off, plus an additional month for free. And as always, they have their 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you're not happy, you can get a refund. Again, NordVPN. With the rapid advance in technology, an interesting thing occurred. The problem is becoming less of having the capability to do something, and more what to do with the capabilities you have. The internet is a good example of this. For pretty much all of human history, the problem was the lack of information. Now, it's too much information, and trying to sort through it and pick out what is important. Warfare used to be real divided. You had tanks fighting tanks on land, ships fighting ships, and aircraft overhead fighting each other and trying to shoot down attacking enemy bombers. Today, you still have land, sea, and air, but also now space and cyber added into it. The real push recently, and into the future, is joint operations between all branches of the military, fighting wars across every domain effectively and efficiently. And this is far from easy to do on a grand scale. Russia has done this pretty well with the battalion tactical groups, which are able to incorporate things like tanks, artillery, recon, air defenses, and electronic warfare on a smaller scale, but across entire theaters of war, trying to figure out where your assets are, how they can best be used together to fully counter and destroy your enemy, and how to structure it all in a way that is efficient is a completely different ballgame. Then the advent of things like drones that can be carried and deployed by individual units to gather intelligence, sharing that information with who needs it most, for example. Being able to have units communicate with air support or other recon assets, satellites, and other units. And this has all been, and continues to be, the big push in the US right now. Shifting to a networked force which improves sharing of information and collaboration to increase situational awareness, and therefore fighting effectiveness. It also allows you to do much more with less, either freeing up other assets to fight elsewhere, or even doing more with a smaller defense budget in general. The US Army, for example, by the end of the decade, wants to shift to more division-centric operations instead of a modular brigade combat team-centric operation. This greatly increases complexity, but affords them much more multi-domain capabilities coming from the division level, such as incorporating space and cyber mentioned earlier. But on a somewhat bigger, strategic level change, is shifting its attention to the Pacific. Throughout the Cold War, the largest and most prevalent potential battlefield was Europe. The Soviet Union had some forces in the East, and they had their Pacific Fleet, but the real focus was Europe. Soviet and Warsaw Pact forces storming across West Germany was the fear, so the US attention was more, unsurprisingly, in that region. But now, Russia is just not the same threat that it used to be to the US. NATO has expanded nearly right up to Russia's doorstep, and Russia just doesn't have anywhere near the capabilities it once had. So now, instead of Europe, it's the Pacific. China is a new Soviet Union in the eyes of the US. This change really kicked off under President Obama, with the moving of ships, submarines, and other forces into the region, as well as attempting to strengthen ties with the allies there, like Japan, South Korea, etc. World War II left the US in an extremely advantageous position in the Pacific, with bases in Guam, Okinawa, and others throughout the region. But as China continues to grow, the US will be focusing more and more attention into the area. China's growth also makes neighboring countries concerned, such as their constructing artificial islands in the South China Sea. And this opens up the possibility for the US to gain allies and attempt to further strengthen relations with existing ones. Taiwan, for example, has been a huge topic recently in the news. but it's also a balancing act. The US shifting more military assets to the area threatens further worsening relations with China, but also with their allies as well. US military bases in Japan and South Korea, for example, have been the source of political problems and animus toward the US. So, in the next 10 years, it'll be an area of great interest not only to the US from a military perspective, but also politically. As far as new weapons of war, at the rate of current procurement, not much is expected to change in the next 10 years. The F-35 program, for example, took nearly 20 years from the beginning of the Joint Strike Fighter program till it became operational, and even then, in very small numbers and with numerous problems to resolve. But one of the biggest changes that's going to be coming is in air defense. Now that the US has a potential enemy, China, with capabilities approaching its own and getting better every year, and the widespread use across the world of small, inexpensive drones, the US again has to focus on air defense. And we've seen a bigger push recently toward directed energy defenses like lasers. The Laws laser system a few years ago, for example, and just recently the Odin laser installed on an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. But, in my opinion, one of the biggest technological changes is the PSQ-90, or ENVG. It combines night vision along with thermal imaging, and the even newer ENVG-B. These have brought night vision and situational awareness practically to the level seen in sci-fi movies and video games. It can display information right into the device from any other linked unit. This means a drone flying overhead, or really any other force operating nearby, can send a live feed that its operator can see. It can also send out what it's seen to any other unit, all giving an unprecedented level of situational awareness. The challenge though, like any other new technology, is learning how to use it effectively, figuring out what information is vital, what is not so much, and what just clutters its view and distracts them from completing their mission. It's a real challenge, not only to properly train your forces in its use, but to also integrate it into joint operations, and all that's a level that's affordable and sustainable, which is another major issue. Trying to incorporate all the latest tech into weapon systems have made them extremely expensive to develop and manufacture. It also runs the risk of encountering so many more problems trying to integrate all these technologies it's trying to take advantage of, further increasing costs, and sometimes to the point where it's just become completely unaffordable. The Zumwalt destroyer, for example, where the US just decided to go back and start building more of the previous class destroyers. Or the XM-1202, which would have replaced the Abrams main battle tank. Instead, the US Army decided to just stick with the M1 tanks for the foreseeable future. The F-35 barely survived this process, and it still has issues, along with endless criticism over it and its costs. So, 10 years from now, it'll be an interesting time. China will undoubtedly be the cause of the most change in the US military. So, how those relations go will determine a lot.